Hello there and welcome back to the Code Wrinkles channel for this brand new video. Even though it's not new, DDD is one of the buzzwords today or even a buzz concept. Unfortunately, however, there are a lot of misconceptions when it comes to DDD and what domain-driven design actually means. And I see this firsthand during the technical interviews that I'm doing, where a lot of candidates say that they are familiar with DDD. But when I ask them exactly what is DDD in a nutshell, they usually answer like this, and I quote, "It's really structuring applications into different layers where the domain is at the center or at the core." While this answer is not fundamentally wrong, this answer describes better clean architecture, onion architecture, or even hexagonal architecture, but it is not what domain-driven design is meant to be. Domain-driven design is much more than that. But worry not, because this video is really the first one in a series of videos dedicated to domain-driven design, in which we will try to demystify all the domain-driven design concepts and find out how we can apply them in our day-to-day projects. And we'll start today by looking into a fundamental building block of domain-driven design, and this is the concept of bounded context. So stay tuned. Before I get into the concept of bounded context, I want to first emphasize that domain-driven design is not only a type of software architecture like clean architecture or onion architecture or other types of software architecture that we might employ or use day by day in our applications or in the applications that we are building. Domain-driven design is actually an entire philosophy of designing and building software that spans a much wider area than just writing and designing code. Like pure DDD also spans across business processes, across team composition, about team roles and responsibilities. It's also about team management, but it's also about across team communication patterns that we might have. And it spans also across the area of the delivery lifecycle, how we want to deliver that specific software. But it even spans across the language that we speak day by day in our project. So this is how wide actually, or how deep domain-driven design goes as a philosophy of designing and building software. And that's also the reason why pure DDD can only be used in very, very big projects where a high number of different teams are involved and working in delivering the same end-to-end product. And very important, the entire business is all in doing domain-driven design. Because you can't really do domain-driven design only like in your own team. Like I have a team and I say I'm doing domain-driven design. So in a very pure meaning of what domain-driven design is, that's actually not possible. Because as we said earlier, domain-driven design spans across different areas or much wider areas than just writing and designing code. So if you don't have the buy-in of all the company or at least of all the business stakeholders in doing DDD, that's kind of like not possible. But this doesn't mean, however, that we can't apply domain-driven design patterns, principles, and techniques in our day-to-day projects, because you can apply those DDD patterns and techniques even to the smallest project. But enough talking, I guess let's dive into the concept of bounded context and let's explain what those bounded contexts actually are. In domain-driven design, a bounded context represents an area of applicability. What does this even mean? So in other words, it represents a boundary within which a certain model is applicable in the same form. And I know that sounds a little bit abstract, so let's dive into an example that's easy to understand. So when I say the word mouse, what is the first thing that you think about? And I'm fairly sure that the answer will kind of like also depend on some variables. For instance, a veterinarian and a software developer might think of two different things when I say the word mouse. So within the area of applicability of a veterinarian, a mouse would probably refer to the animal that we all know. While in the area of applicability of a software engineer or of an IT guy, a mouse would probably refer to the peripheral that we use to navigate a screen. And therefore, in the veterinarian bounded context, the mouse has a very precise applicability, while in the software engineering or IT bounded context, the same mouse will have a total different area of applicability and a totally different form. Now, let's move into an example that's much closer to actually software engineering and software design. And let's assume that we are in charge of building a brand new e-commerce platform. How would you go about it? Or to be more precise, how would you design, for instance, your product class? Let's move over to our IDE and first take a look at how we'd probably approach this without domain-driven design and without thinking about bounded contexts. So here we are in our IDE and we have here a project, as you can see in this solution folder without DDD. So this is how we will how we would most probably go to actually implement the task that I was mentioning earlier when we don't think about any of the domain-driven design concepts. And we see here that we have a product and the product has an ID. Of course, we probably need this ID to kind of like persist this product in a database, but it's kind of like a totally different discussion when it comes to persistence and what actually a domain model is according to domain-driven design, and it is not in scope of this video. But then we have here a bunch of different type of properties, like we have the product name, we have the product description, and we have a list of product categories because each product could have or could belong to several categories. And of course, each category will have a different bunch of products. And then we have a different other set of properties, which is, for instance, this price without VAT, then the VAT percentage, so the percentage of VAT that needs to be applied, then the VAT value, what would be the total value of the VAT when applied to actually to the price without VAT, and last but not least, we have this price including VAT. Of course, these properties might be just calculated. You probably will need only this one, and then you would be able to kind of only this one, and then you would be able to calculate these other two. But then still we have these properties because kind of like we need them. And then we have another property here, which is the quantity on hand. We need to know when somebody places an order for a certain product. We need to know if, well, actually we have that product in our inventory, in our stock. So that's why we actually need this information. But then we'll probably also need an information like the restock threshold. So for instance, when a product count or inventory count reaches a certain number of items, we kind of like would restock the product, like we would make an order to our supplier to get some new items of that specific product. And then we have a product code that's also usually used in inventories when we kind of like want to, well, have or know exactly which product or each product will have a certain code. And it makes things easier to find or to look after when kind of like you are doing inventory. And then we have a list of review because, of course, on an e-commerce platform, users might be able to kind of like send reviews for a certain product. And then we have this review average, like probably the review, if we take a look at the review, is kind of like with stars or based on stars. And probably the average in this case would be the average of the stars numbers of the star number that kind of like that product got in each review. And that looks actually nice. It's not that bad. However, when we think in terms about, okay, what areas of applicability does this product actually, or where is this product applicable as an area? And the thing is here that basically what we have is kind of like something like a God class. So we created a product class that knows really everything about our e-commerce platform and our e-commerce application. Because let's kind of like try to do some things here. So first of all, we have a bunch of properties that we might need kind of like to describe the product. And for this one, we need the product name, we need the title, and probably also the categories for the product. But then if we take a look here, this bunch of properties kind of like they describe the pricing. So how the pricing for that specific product works. So this could actually be another area of applicability. But then we have some other here that kind of like they say this is kind of like inventory. So these properties are applicable when we think in terms of inventory. And then last but not least, we have these two properties that are applicable, for instance, in reviews. And in reviews, we kind of like care about the review itself, the review average, and of course, there might be actually different other properties here. But I guess you get the idea. So if we think about our class and we think about the properties in our class, to which kind of like an area of applicability they belong, you can see that you kind of like can group these properties into certain groups that are needed for a certain purpose in our application. So the idea is that according to domain-driven design and thinking in terms of bounded context, it would mean that we would have to then split actually all these properties, of course, or across different products that kind of like mean a different thing in a different area of applicability. And usually when you go about kind of like designing a bounded context, of course, as said earlier in this video, domain-driven design is usually used when we have large projects, and in those projects, probably each bounded context will kind of somehow maybe have its own team that will work on that with I don't know, in some cases it might be actually also belong to a certain microservices, so it would even be in a totally different repository or a separate repository than all the other stuff. But the idea for the bounded context is that each bounded context should be kind of like self-contained and self-isolated, so it should be able to work with only the information that it has into this bounded context. So when we are thinking in terms of domain-driven design, the first thing that we need to think about when we create a new application is what are the areas of applicability of our application, or in other terms, what are the bounded contexts of our application. And to keep things simple here, I will do everything in this only one solution, and to have this split across different bounded contexts, or to define different bounded contexts for our e-commerce platform, I will use solution folders. So what we can do here is simply we can look into the things that we have identified here and create a bounded context for each of them. So I will go here in the solution, I would add a new solution folder, and let's here we have this product description in an e-commerce. That would kind of like be probably a bounded context that refers to the catalog. So then we have the catalog bounded context. Then we can add here in the solution, and okay, I'm not sure what the problem is here. Add a new solution folder, and here we will have a bounded context for pricing. Of course, you can maybe name it differently, like accounting or whatever you want to name it, but the idea is that this is a clear and distinct area of applicability. So what we'll do here is then we'll add a new solution folder, and then this would be for the inventory bounded context. And here in this inventory bounded context, we'll move probably these properties here, and then we'll have another bounded context that is kind of like the reviews. So let's add a new solution and let's call it reviews. And what I will do right now, and I will be then right back here, is I will create some projects in all of these bounded contexts, and then we will see exactly into how we can actually move the different moving parts of this main product that we have here into the different bounded contexts that we have in our application. And here's the end results. So we have done earlier, we have split and we have defined bounded context through solution folders. And now I have created basically one project in each of the bounded context. And for each of the projects, I named it after the bounded context and then this word domain, because what we are doing right now is we are modeling the domain. Now, the next thing that we would need to do is kind of like move all the parts that we have in a product here, which is a God class that kind of like spans across multiple areas of applicability, and move everything in the area of applicability that it actually belongs. And by the way, you will see that in each of the domain each of the domain projects in each bounded context, we have this product class. Because once again, we have this concept of product. Remember the idea with the mouse, or the example with the mouse, like we have the product, like the name is the same, but in each bounded context, it actually means a different thing, or it has a different area of applicability. So if we think in terms of the catalog bounded context, a product should actually contain this type of stuff. And let's take this from here. Let's go into the catalog service. And I have already added the identifier, because one thing is with bounded contexts, they will all, or each bounded context should also have a different persistent layer. Or so this means that you would save actually each bounded context or each product from each bounded context in a dedicated or a separate database. Or if you want to actually use the same database, you would kind of like use a different schema of the database for each bounded context. So still you would have to persist everything in the database. And kind of like we have covered this, or we have moved this, what it belongs to the catalog applicability or area of applicability, which is a bounded context, is just the name, the product description, and the idea of having categories. And then if we go back to the product and let's see what else do we have here. Now we have all these things that concern the pricing part. So let's just take everything from this pricing. And for this, we have a dedicated area of applicability. So a place where actually, or a context, a boundary within which a product always actually means just the price without VAT, the VAT percentage, the VAT value, and the price including VAT. And probably would have additional things that regarding pricing, like if you want to have discounts or things like that, everything will be here. But once again, in the bounded context or in the area of applicability of pricing, we don't really care about the product name, about the product description, about the categories or all the other stuff. We just care about this. So within this area of applicability, we just care about product actually means only this. So for the bounded context, a product means only things and behavior, or well, state and behavior that kind of has to do something with pricing, nothing else. Now, if we then go back to our product and we see that here we have this inventory, so we can take all these properties that belong to the concept of inventory to this area of applicability, and we can go here at the product and we place all the information here. So we have kind of like done that. And if we go back to the product, we see that we still have this idea with reviews. And let's also take this, and for this idea, or for the concept of reviews, we have a dedicated area of applicability. This means a dedicated bounded context, and everything that is related to this bounded context is kind of like moved here. So I guess you get the idea. And when we start to design software according to domain-driven design, as I said, the very first thing that we need to do is kind of like to define or to see which are the different areas of applicability. And we have seen here that for a product, we have identified, like we have started from a class that kind of like incorporated everything. And we have moved over to kind of like, okay, we have grouped the properties into different areas of applicabilities. And then what we have done is for each area of applicability, we have created a new bounded context. Now, the way that a bounded context looks in our case is that we separate it through a solution folder, and in each solution folder, we have a project that represents that specific bounded context, or the models or the domain of that specific bounded context. And then things got a lot more clear from a lot of point of views, because right now, if we look into the catalog, a product only or always means the product name, the description, and the categories. We don't care about pricing. We don't care about anything else. In the inventory, a product actually means a quantity on hand, a restock threshold, and a product code. So only things, state, and behavior that kind of like relates to this area of applicability of an inventory. And then for the pricing, and here we have only state and behavior kind of like that belong to this area of applicability of pricing. And then for reviews, it's exactly the same. A product from a point of view or in the bounded context of reviews always just means a list of reviews and a review average. We don't care about the product name. We don't care about the product title. We don't care about the product description or the categories. We don't care about inventory information. We don't care about pricing information. In this bounded context, the only thing that we care about, or a product actually cares about, and what actually a product means in this bounded context, is just a list of reviews and the review average. And kind of like this is what it means to design and think your applications, first of all, in terms of bounded context. And believe me, guys, this is, from my point of view, one of the core principles of domain-driven design, like architecting and designing the application around areas of applicability or bounded context. Whenever you have a project, for instance, or you hear somebody that says, hey, we are doing domain-driven design, but they are not actually dividing their application in areas of applicability, and each area of applicability with its own model, that is actually not really domain-driven design. Now, of course, you could deploy other domain-driven design tools or techniques in your applications, but if you don't have bounded context, and if you don't think of your application and you don't design your application according to this concept of area of applicabilities, that's not domain-driven design anymore. Okay, now I would also like to say that probably a lot of you that already are a little bit familiar with domain-driven design will say, hey, but here you just have a bunch of properties. This is not really domain-driven design, what you have written here. And the answer is yes, but it is totally out of scope of this video. In this video, I just wanted actually to go into this concept and kind of like show a way of thinking and a way of designing applications around areas of applicability or around bounded context. So the example that I have used is just actually to summarize or to kind of like have a visual representation of what it would actually mean in practice designing or thinking about an application in terms of bounded context. And that's why we have done everything. Of course, this is not 100% domain-driven design what we have in this class so far, but we will cover other more in-depth concepts about domain-driven design in later videos. This being said, thank you very, very much for watching. If you enjoyed this content and if you think that this content might be actually important only for others, don't forget to share this with your friends, with your peers, on social networks, on forums, wherever you see it fit. And wherever you think that there might be people finding this content useful, share them, and those people will probably be thankful to you. Also, if you didn't subscribe to the channel, subscribe and hit also the notification bell button so that you will always be notified when there is some new activity on the Code Wrinkles channel, because I do a lot of stuff here. So at least 2 videos per week. We do a bunch of live streams each week. So kind of like probably you want to get in touch and know exactly when something happens. Also, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button. That would help a lot for this video getting basically also promoted by YouTube. And if you have any other question, don't be shy and just hit the comment section below and write your comment, write your question, write your thoughts, and I would be more than happy to get a discussion going and to get in touch with you. This being said, once again, thank you very, very much for watching, and until the next time, I wish you the very best.